warning to our viewers. What you're about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
What is your emergency?
Oh, my wife's not breathing! My wife, I just woke up, my wife's dead!
She's got broken ribs. She's got a broken nose. She's got cuts behind her ear. She's got approximately 30 pellets in her. What kind of life did this woman have?
The smell as they walked down that basement staircase hit them first. An acrid, sickly odor unlike anything they'd encountered before. December 6th, 2009. Ottawa police officers were about to descend into a scene that would haunt them forever. Bloodstains splattered the walls, the hallway floor, the stair posts, a broken door. And there, on a makeshift mattress of couch pillows, lay what would defy all comprehension, a 33-year-old woman's body, so badly burned that forensic officers couldn't take her fingerprints, 29 airgun pellets embedded in her flesh, burns covering 40% of her body. Detective Tara Anderson, a seasoned officer, would later testify, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." But the most chilling detail of all, she had been alive, suffering in agony, for 11 days while the man who promised to love and protect her watched her slowly die. This wasn't some random act of violence in a dark alley. This wasn't a stranger's crime. This happened in a quiet Ottawa neighborhood behind the closed doors of a modest home on Barwell Avenue. The perpetrator? The very man who had vowed to love, honor, and cherish her just 2 years earlier. The man she protected even as he destroyed her. The man she called husband. This is the bone-chilling blueprint of the most methodical murder ever committed behind wedding vows, and the twisted mind that orchestrated 11 days of calculated torture. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. This was Ottawa in 2009, a city where nearly 120,000 federal employees formed the backbone of Canada's capital. Professional, educated, progressive, the kind of place where colleagues looked out for each other, where domestic violence awareness was growing, where people believed they could spot the warning signs. But the statistics told a chilling story. 7% of women across Canada were experiencing spousal violence, yet only 25% of incidents ever reached police. This was the pre-smartphone era, before social media made abuse harder to hide, before apps could secretly document evidence, before GPS tracking revealed the full scope of control. In government offices throughout downtown Ottawa, in the gleaming federal buildings that housed Canada's civil service, colleagues worked side by side, unaware that one of their own was slowly being destroyed. That the cheerful woman who organized their office parties was living a nightmare behind closed doors. That being surrounded by caring, educated professionals meant nothing when the predator lived in your own home, because domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about your education, your income, your postal code, and sometimes knowing all the signs in the world isn't enough to save the person you love from the monster sleeping beside them. Donna Ellen Jones entered this world on Christmas Day, 1975, a gift to her family and everyone who would come to know her. But her early life, while filled with love, also planted the seeds of vulnerability that would later make her a target. Raised in a traditional household, Donna learned early that women were expected to be accommodating, submissive, and above all, to honor their husbands. These weren't just family values, they were the foundation of a belief system that would later trap her in a cycle of abuse. As a child, Donna struggled with self-consciousness about her appearance and weight. She had a lazy eye that made her feel awkward around others, particularly boys. These insecurities, though common in adolescence, would follow her into adulthood, creating cracks in her confidence that a predator would later exploit. But Donna's spirit was stronger than her doubts. Determined to build a better life for herself, Donna became the first person in her family to attend university. At Carleton University, she blossomed into the woman she was meant to be, intelligent, driven, and fiercely independent. She didn't just attend university, she excelled, all while working to pay her own way. Education wasn't handed to Donna Jones. She earned every credit, every degree, every opportunity through sheer determination. After graduation, Donna landed a position with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, where she quickly established herself as a rising star. Her colleagues respected her intelligence and work ethic, and her supervisors saw unlimited potential in the young professional. In an era when many young people struggled with student debt for decades, Donna paid off her loans in record time, a testament to her financial discipline and fierce independence. By her late 20s, Donna had achieved what many only dream of. She owned her own home, had a stable career with the federal government, and had built a solid financial foundation for her future. She was living proof that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. She was exactly the kind of woman other young people looked up to. Successful, grounded, and completely self-sufficient. But it was Donna's personality that made her truly special. Friends and colleagues described her with words that painted a picture of someone who lit up every room she entered. Bubbly, outgoing, an absolute sunshine. She wasn't just successful, she was joyful. Her laugh was infectious, her energy contagious. She was the friend everyone wanted to be around, the colleague who made even the most mundane work projects feel fun. Donna was the social organizer of her diverse group of friends, the one who brought people together, who remembered birthdays and planned gatherings. She had a gift for making others feel included and valued. In a world that often feels fragmented and lonely, Donna Jones was a connector, a light that drew people together. Her financial acumen was something she took particular pride in. Having grown up without privilege, Donna understood the value of every dollar. She was careful with her money, strategic in her planning, always thinking ahead. Her small home wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of everything she had accomplished on her own terms. Christmas birthdays can sometimes feel overlooked, but Donna's family always made her day special. Those celebrations were filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of joy that only comes from being deeply loved. Donna had dreams that stretched far beyond her current success, ambitions that would have taken her even further in her career, plans for the future that sparkled with possibility. This was the woman Mark Hutt destroyed. Not just a victim, but a vibrant human being with hopes, dreams, and so much life left to live. A woman who had overcome every obstacle life had thrown at her, only to fall victim to the one danger she couldn't see coming, the man who had promised to love her. To understand how a monster hides in plain sight, you have to understand Mark Peter Hutt. On the surface, he seemed harmless enough, a 32-year-old occasional roofer with an easy smile and a talent for making himself appear vulnerable. But beneath that carefully constructed facade lurked something far more sinister. Mark's life was a pattern of instability and manipulation. He worked sporadically, drifting from job to job, never quite able to support himself. His financial history read like a cautionary tale: mounting debts, unpaid bills, and ultimately a bankruptcy filing in June 2006, just around the time he got engaged to Donna. It wasn't coincidence, it was calculation. Predators have an uncanny ability to identify their perfect victims, and Mark had found his in Donna Jones. Here was a woman who had been taught by her father to honor her husband, a woman who was self-conscious about her appearance, who had struggled with confidence around men, a woman with a generous heart, financial stability, and a deep-seated need to nurture and fix broken things. To Mark, Donna wasn't a person, she was an opportunity. The red flags were there from day one, glaring and undeniable. Mark was emotionally dependent from the moment they met, clinging to Donna with an intensity that should have been alarming, but he disguised his neediness as devotion, his control as caring. He would call her workplace at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency up to a dozen times a day, Not to chat, but to monitor, to control, to ensure she was exactly where he expected her to be. The true nature of Mark's personality was revealed in hundreds of handwritten notes found throughout their home after Donna's death. These notes painted a chilling picture of his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde nature. One moment calling Donna a terrible wife, the next insisting, "You are my angel." The psychological manipulation was constant, calculated, and devastating. Mark's appetite for expensive toys was voracious and telling. Despite his inability to hold steady employment, he craved luxury, trucks, ATVs, snowmobiles, snowboards, endless equipment that his own income could never support. But that was Donna's job now. She was his personal bank account, his funding source for a lifestyle he had never earned. Most disturbing of all were the whispers about Mark's behavior with other women before Donna. There had been complaints, concerns raised about his treatment of previous partners, but these warning signs were either dismissed or overlooked, allowing Mark to continue his predatory pattern until he found the perfect victim, a woman whose own upbringing had primed her to accept his abuse as somehow normal, even deserved. Summer 2005. It started innocently enough. A mutual friend thought Donna and Mark would be perfect for each other. But sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who come recommended. Mark Peter Hutt was 32, an occasional roofer with a charming smile and a talent for making himself seem helpless. Donna, with her generous heart and natural desire to nurture, was the perfect target. The change was immediate and alarming. The woman who had been the social organizer of her friend group, the one who brought everyone together, suddenly began pulling away. Phone calls went unanswered. Social gatherings were declined. At work, colleagues at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency noticed their rising star was dimming. Donna's previously outstanding performance began to slip, her focus scattered, her confidence eroding. The control was suffocating. Mark would call Donna's workplace a dozen times a day, not sweet check-ins but interrogations. Where was she? Who was she with? What was she doing? Friends began overhearing these conversations, witnessing the verbal abuse that poured through the phone. They watched as Donna would flinch when her phone rang, as she would anxiously glance around before answering, as if afraid someone might hear her being torn down by the man who claimed to love her. By 2007, as wedding plans progressed, Donna's friends had seen enough. They organized what they hoped would be a life-saving intervention. They sat her down, these brilliant, educated women who cared deeply about their friend, and they begged her not to marry Mark Hutt. They had watched him isolate her, control her, diminish her. They could see the signs written clearly across her increasingly fragile frame. But trauma bonds are invisible chains, and Donna couldn't break free. When the intervention failed, her wedding party faced an impossible choice: stand by and watch their friend marry her destroyer, or take a stand. One by one, they backed out of the wedding party, hoping their absence would send a message loud enough to wake Donna up. The message wasn't received. On September 15, 2007, Donna Ellen Jones became Donna Hutt, sealing her fate with promises of love, honor, and obedience. The photographs from that day would later haunt everyone who knew her. Donna's smile bright but brittle, her body already showing the devastating effects of Mark's control. In just 2 years of being with him, her weight had plummeted from 162 pounds to a skeletal 101 pounds. Mark had found his meal ticket, and he intended to drain every last penny from it. The woman who had been so proud of her financial independence, who had paid off her student loans in record time and bought her own home, was being systematically destroyed. Mark's appetite for expensive toys was voracious. A truck, an ATV, a snowmobile, a snowboard, endless gadgets and equipment that Donna's federal salary was forced to fund. By 2009, the inevitable had happened. Donna Jones, once financially secure and independent, filed for bankruptcy. The woman who had never borrowed money was reduced to asking her parents for small loans. She owed $50,000 on top of her mortgage. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, had been consumed by Mark Hutt's greed. The destruction was complete. Except for Donna herself, and that, tragically, would be next. The signs were impossible to ignore, yet somehow they were. Months before her death, mysterious burns began appearing on Donna's arms, oozing, infected wounds that she refused to have treated. Colleagues at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency watched in growing horror as their friend arrived at work with increasingly obvious injuries. Black eyes that makeup couldn't hide, bruises in various stages of healing, cuts and scrapes that told a story of systematic violence. What they couldn't see was even worse. The autopsy would later reveal the full scope of Mark's cruelty. 9 fractured ribs, some old, some recent, 7 calloused ribs, suggesting earlier fractures likely caused by kicks, a broken nose that had healed improperly, 2 black eyes, a broken left finger, bent backward in what could only have been deliberate torture, fractures to both wrists, including what forensic experts called a nightstick fracture, the kind of break that occurs when someone raises their arm defensively against a blow. And then there were the pellets, 29 airgun pellets embedded throughout Donna's body, some having been there for months. The lead poisoning in her system told the story of prolonged torture, Mark using her as target practice, firing at close range to ensure the pellets penetrated her skin. This wasn't momentary rage. This was calculated, sustained cruelty. November 24, 2009. What Mark Hutt would later claim was an accident bore all the hallmarks of premeditation. According to his own admission to police, he went down to the basement and retrieved a special pot, one large enough for what he had planned. He filled it with boiling water, and, according to detective interviews, he added vinegar, a detail that speaks to calculated malice. Vinegar makes burns more severe, more painful, harder to heal. When Mark poured that scalding mixture over Donna, 40% of her body was burned with 3rd and 4th degree burns. These weren't splash burns from a cooking accident. The pattern of injuries showed deliberate, methodical application. The burns covered her stomach, arms, and sides, areas that would be covered by clothing hidden from view. Even in his final act of violence, Mark was thinking about concealment. For 11 agonizing days, Donna lay dying in that basement while Mark lived his life above her. His cell phone records tell a chilling story of callous indifference. While his wife was succumbing to infection and septic shock, Mark was making calls throughout Ottawa, to Aylmer, Quebec, to Vanier, to Kirkwood. He called a paintball store in Merivale, shopping for equipment. He called his divorced parents. He even called an ex-girlfriend. Yet somehow, Donna still protected him. In her final phone calls to her mother, she maintained the fiction that everything was fine. She told colleagues that Mark was taking good care of her, running errands, cooking meals. Lies that must have been agony to speak. The trauma bond that kept her captive was so strong that even as she was dying, she couldn't break free. Even as Mark shot her with pellets after the scalding, adding torture to her final hours, Donna Jones kept his secrets until death freed her from the prison he had built around her mind. December 6, 2009, 4:47 p.m. Mark Hutt finally made the call he should have made 11 days earlier.
What is your emergency?
Oh, my wife's not breathing. My wife, I just woke up. My wife's dead.
Make sure she's on a firm, flat surface on her back.
She is.
Open her mouth by tilting her head back slightly. If you see a foreign object, gently remove it.
There's nothing in there.
Excellent.
My wife is dead, he told the 911 operator, his voice strangely calm for a man who had just discovered his wife's body. But Mark hadn't just discovered anything. Forensic evidence would later prove that Donna had been dead for at least 12 hours before he picked up that phone. When paramedic Logan Martin arrived at the Barwell Avenue home, she was unprepared for the horror that awaited her. Donna's face was so swollen that Martin couldn't open her eyes to check her pupils. When she lifted Donna's t-shirt to assess the burn injuries, The fabric was literally stuck to the wounds. Detective Tara Anderson, who had seen her share of crime scenes, was shaken to her core. "I've never seen anything like this in my life." She would later tell the court that Donna looked like she had been dragged behind a car on a gravel road. The basement told its own story of prolonged violence. Forensic officer Sergeant Stephen Jones documented red stains, blood, splattered on walls, across the hallway floor, on stair posts. A broken door hung at an angle. The acrid smell of decomposition mixed with something far more sinister filled the air. This wasn't the scene of an accident. This was a torture chamber. Mark's stories began immediately, and they changed just as quickly. First, he told Detective Anderson that Donna had been drunk when she fell into a fire pit at a friend's party in Cornwall. Co-workers had patted her down, he claimed, and when she got home, she refused medical attention. The story was elaborate, detailed, and completely fabricated. When that lie crumbled under scrutiny, Mark pivoted to his backup story, an accident with boiling water. He claimed he was carrying a pot when he accidentally spilled it on Donna 11 days earlier. He had tried to treat her burns himself, he insisted, because she refused to go to the hospital. He even claimed he had pawned items to buy bandages for her arms. But forensic evidence doesn't lie. The pattern of burns showed deliberate, methodical application, not accidental spillage.
My wife has never spoken to me the way she spoke to me 2 weeks ago. She basically told me that she was going to go with somebody else, that I wasn't going to be a father, that, because I do, you know what I mean? I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect person. I get stressed out just like everybody else. And it all started one day. I was making spaghetti in the kitchen, and I wanted to make enough for 2 weeks because my wife loves spaghetti. She loved my spaghetti. She loved it to death. So I was making a pot. I was boiling water for the noodles, and she came up behind me, and she said something about just like, this isn't working. This isn't happening. I'm gonna cheat on you, basically. Like I'm, you know what I mean? If things don't work out, I'm going, you know. And she kept just saying it and putting it in my head and putting it in my head and putting it in my head. Bills in our house have been stacked up higher than you can imagine. I've been going through things with my father, everything like that. And when she said that to me, the water was boiling, and she was behind me, and I thought she had left the room. Instead of leaving the room, she was behind me. She was crouched down, and she was getting Tupperware out of the thing to bring for work. And I don't know why, I don't know what I did, but the next thing I knew, I hit that thing, man. I wanted to just, you know what I mean? I was so frustrated, I just wanted to you know, get my frustrations out.
Okay.
And when I hit that pot, she was behind me, and it just drenched her. And after that, I looked at her and I said, "Sweetheart, we need to go to a hospital." And she said, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go to a hospital." She was afraid for me to get in trouble, and I said, I don't care. Just go to a hospital, please. We can deal with this together. It's an accident. We can get through it. She didn't want to go. I begged. I pleaded with her. She made up a story to her parents saying she was going to Cornwall for work. And she actually did have a cold. She called her work and said she had a cold, that she was staying home, and she wanted to heal at home. And I told her, I said, we can't do this. We have to get to a hospital. That went on for about a week of me changing bandages, staying up all night making sure she's okay.
The basement pot, specially retrieved and filled with boiling water and vinegar, told a different story. Blood evidence throughout the house painted a picture of systematic violence that spanned months, not a single tragic accident. The autopsy conducted by forensic pathologist Christopher Milroy revealed the full scope of Mark's depravity. 29 air gun pellets embedded in Donna's flesh, fired from close range. Some having been in her body for months, others added after the scalding as she lay dying. The pellets had caused lead poisoning, though not enough to kill her. That honor belonged to the burns that covered 40% of her body. Dr. Joel Fish, medical director of the burn unit at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, delivered devastating testimony. Had Donna received proper medical treatment, she would have had a virtually 100% chance of survival. Mark Hutt hadn't just tortured his wife. He had deliberately denied her the medical care that would have saved her life. Investigators found additional evidence that painted a picture of a predator: handcuffs, a bow and arrow, a sword, and finally, they investigated the third-party complaint that Donna's friends had filed with Ottawa police the day after she was scalded, a complaint that had sat uninvestigated until after her body was discovered. Too late to save Donna Jones, but not too late for justice. When Mark Hutt's trial began in May 2013, even his own defense attorney couldn't deny the horror of what had happened. In a stunning courtroom admission, defense lawyer Lorne Goldstein conceded that his client had tortured Donna Jones beyond comprehension. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, too damning, too graphic to dispute. Faced with a mountain of forensic evidence, Mark attempted one final manipulation. He pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of criminal negligence causing death, a last-ditch effort to avoid a murder conviction. But Crown Prosecutor Vicky Bear wasn't having it. The Crown rejected his plea and argued what the evidence clearly showed. This was first-degree murder, calculated and deliberate. The prosecution laid out a case that painted Mark as a methodical predator who had systematically destroyed his wife over 4 years. The boiling water mixed with vinegar, the air gun pellets fired after the scalding, the 11 days of watching her die while he went about his daily life. This wasn't negligence, this was murder with malice aforethought. The jury needed less than a day to reach their verdict. On June 7, 2013, they returned to the packed courtroom with their decision: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Applause thundered through the chamber as Donna's friends and family finally heard the words they'd waited 3.5 years to hear. Her brother Derek pumped his fist in the air, tears streaming down his face. "An evil man was put to jail for evil crimes to my sister, and he will pay for the rest of his life." The sentence was automatic, life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. At his sentencing hearing, Mark offered a hollow apology, asking for forgiveness from the family and friends he had traumatized. But Donna's former boss, Adrienne DiTietro, spoke for many when she responded, "His last words were for us to forgive him. Never. We may come to terms with this, but there will never be forgiveness from me." Justice had been served, but it came at a price that could never be repaid. The guilt among Donna's survivors was overwhelming. Her friend Melanie Hooley, who had introduced the couple, carried a burden that words couldn't heal. "Had I not introduced the two of them, it is likely that Donna would still be alive. Instead, I allowed a monster into our shared circle of friends and walked her down the aisle in a coffin." For Donna's family, Christmas would never be the same. Their beloved daughter was born on Christmas Day, and now that day would forever be marked by loss. Her mother, Irina, spoke of missing Donna's presence, her laughter, the comfort she brought to their lives. Donna's story exposes a harsh truth about domestic violence. Sometimes asking isn't enough. Sometimes intervention isn't enough. The trauma bonds that keep victims trapped are invisible chains that even the strongest support systems can't always break. Her colleagues tried, her friends tried, her family tried, and still they couldn't save her. But perhaps that's exactly why Donna's story matters. It reminds us that domestic violence isn't about education or awareness alone. It's about power, control, and the systematic destruction of a human being's will to survive. It calls us to do better, to create stronger safety nets, and to never stop fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves.
An evil man was put to jail for evil crimes done to my sister, and he will pay for the rest of his life. The justice system prevail, and the dear Lord will take care of him in the afterlife.
How much of a toll has this taken on your family?
It's taken an enormous toll. It's such a negative impact for someone that died so young and so senseless. I mean, all she wanted to do was have a loving, caring family, and this is what she got from an evil man.
Donna's voice was silenced by Mark Hutt. Is her voice speaking out now?
She is now, loud and clear.
What is she saying?
She's saying that nobody can do this to anybody, and that if you need help, get help. Please, don't allow it to happen. Get help. There's lots of support networks out there. You deserve better. You don't need to suffer anything. You are all good people. You just have a bad situation, and there's lots of doors that you can open, that people will open for you to get through it, to move on.
What do you want to say to Mark Hutt?
I have nothing to say to him.
December 19th, 1979. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The temperature hovered just below freezing as Christmas shoppers hurried through Westdale Mall. No one noticed the horror unfolding in a green Buick Electra parked in the shadows of the lot. Inside that car, 18-year-old Michelle Martinko fought for her life. Her hands slashed as she tried to defend herself from a frenzied knife attack that would leave her stabbed 29 times in the face, chest, and hands. By 4 a.m., police flashlights would illuminate a scene that would haunt Cedar Rapids for decades. Michelle's body slumped over, her blonde hair matted with blood, her white winter coat now crimson. The killer had vanished without a trace. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no suspects. Just blood, Michelle's and someone else's. For nearly 4 decades, Michelle's murder tormented Cedar Rapids like an unsolved riddle. A generation of teenagers grew into middle age, carrying the memory of a killer who vanished without a trace. Her ex-boyfriend lived under a cloud of suspicion that followed him across the country. Her parents went to their graves believing justice would never come. And with each passing year, the chances of solving the case seemed to fade like the ink on the aging case files. Then science caught up with a killer who thought he'd gotten away with murder. A discarded straw at a pizza restaurant. DNA preserved for 4 decades. A family tree built from a genealogy website, all leading to a man no one suspected. A respectable businessman with no criminal record who'd been hiding in plain sight for 39 years. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. December 1979. Jimmy Carter occupied the White House. Gas cost around 86 cents a gallon, and Americans were still reeling from the Iran hostage crisis that had begun the month before. In Cedar Rapids, Iowa, factory whistles punctuated the day as workers at companies like Quaker Oats and Wilson Foods clocked in and out, providing the backbone of this hard-working Midwestern city. The new Westdale Mall, opened just 2 years earlier, represented progress and prosperity, a gleaming 2-story shopping center where teenagers gathered after school and families tackled their Christmas shopping. The mall's bright fluorescent lighting and holiday decorations created an illusion of safety and security that would soon be shattered. Cedar Rapids in 1979 was a place where violent crime remained rare enough to shock the community. The murder rate hovered below the national average, and residents still viewed their city as immune to the type of violence plaguing larger urban centers. Police officers knew most residents by name. Parents let their teenagers drive to the mall alone without a second thought. 18-year-old Michelle Martinko embodied the wholesome promise of Cedar Rapids youth. A high school senior at Kennedy High with dreams of college, she sang in the choir and twirled batons at football games. On December 19th, she attended a choir banquet at the Sheraton Inn, then headed to Westdale Mall alone to check on a winter coat her mother had placed on layaway. It was the last night of her life. What followed was a murder investigation that would span 4 decades, baffled 2 generations of detectives, and ultimately be solved by a technology that didn't even exist when Michelle drew her final breath in that mall parking lot. The vicious nature of the crime, 29 stab wounds, many to her beautiful face, suggested a deeply personal rage. Yet for 39 years, investigators couldn't connect her to her killer. What happened to Michelle Martinko in that mall parking lot didn't end when the killer slipped away into the night. For 40 years, her murder haunted Cedar Rapids like a ghost, driving investigators' careers, tormenting the wrongfully accused, and teaching a Midwestern city that monsters can hide behind ordinary faces. But in Michelle's final moments, as she fought desperately for her life, she unknowingly collected the evidence that would one day speak her killer's name. In the darkness of that mall parking lot, more than a young woman's life ended. A killer's clock began ticking. Michelle Marie Martinko was born on October 6, 1961, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to Albert and Janet Martinko. Her arrival was something of a miracle. Janet was 44 years old and had already suffered through 5 miscarriages before Michelle was born. The Martinko family, including Michelle's older sister Janelle, who was 12 when Michelle came along, cherished their miracle baby. But Michelle's early life wasn't without challenges. At age 12, she was diagnosed with scoliosis, a curvature of the spine that required her to wear a restrictive medical brace from her neck down to her hips. For a young girl entering adolescence, the condition was devastating. She felt very different, very self-conscious, her sister Janelle would later recall. She couldn't move around like other kids could move around, so that was a tough period. Yet these struggles shaped Michelle's character. By age 14, she was finally able to shed the brace, and what emerged was a young woman determined to make up for lost time. Her transformation was remarkable. The once restricted teenager blossomed, growing her blonde hair long in the style of Farrah Fawcett, and developing a distinctive sense of fashion that turned heads. At Cedar Rapids Kennedy High School, Michelle excelled both academically and socially. She maintained above-average grades while joining the twirling squad as a sophomore. She performed in choir and theater productions, showcasing a natural talent for performance. Teachers and school officials regarded her highly, impressed by both her academic dedication and positive attitude. Despite her growing popularity, Michelle maintained a smaller circle of close friends. Some speculated that jealousy over her beauty and stylish clothes kept some potential friendships at bay, but those who knew her well described Michelle as kind, determined, and warm-hearted, someone who had overcome physical limitations and emerged stronger for it. As a high school senior in 1979, Michelle had her sights set firmly on the future. She planned to attend Iowa State University to study interior design, a perfect outlet for her creative talents and meticulous eye for detail. Her parents, supportive as always, were preparing to help launch their youngest daughter into adulthood. On December 19, 1979, Michelle attended a banquet for the Kennedy Concert Choir at the Sheraton Inn in Cedar Rapids. She wore a black jersey dress with a black scarf, black pantyhose and heels, and a waist-length white and brown rabbit fur jacket. After the event, Michelle asked 2 different friends to join her at Westdale Mall to pick up a winter coat her mother had placed on layaway. When both declined, she decided to go alone. It was the last decision Michelle Martinko would ever make. By morning, the vibrant 18-year-old with a bright future would be found dead, her promising life cut violently short in the darkness of a mall parking lot. As we go into the most chilling details of this documentary, take a brief moment to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already for more in-depth investigations and analysis of significant cases like this. On the evening of December 19, 1979, Michelle Martinko attended the Kennedy Concert Choir banquet at the Sheraton Inn in Cedar Rapids. After the event ended, she needed to finalize the purchase of a winter coat her mother had placed on layaway at Westdale Mall. With $180 in her purse, Michelle drove the family's tan and green 1972 Buick Electra to the shopping center, arriving sometime after 7 p.m. Security footage didn't exist, but witness accounts pieced together Michelle's final hours. Several mall employees and acquaintances reported seeing her browsing stores. Tracy Price, a classmate, ran into Michelle and cautioned her about displaying the cash she was carrying. "Put that away," he warned. "Don't be flashing money out here in the middle of everybody." What Price didn't know then was that Michelle had confided in another friend that she felt nervous about being at the mall alone and thought someone might be following her. Michelle was last seen alive around 9 p.m. outside a jewelry store in the mall. She had decided against purchasing the coat after all. As the mall prepared to close, Michelle walked alone through the darkened parking lot to her car, parked in a remote section near JCPenney. What happened next would remain unknown for decades. But the evidence would tell a chilling story. When Michelle didn't return home by 2 a.m., her worried father reported her missing. Police began searching, and at approximately 4 a.m. on December 20th, officers discovered the Martinko family's Buick in the northeast corner of the mall parking lot. Inside, they found a scene of shocking violence. Michelle's body was slumped over the passenger seat, her clothes soaked in blood. The medical examiner would later determine she had been stabbed 29 times in the face, neck, and chest. Deep cuts on her hands showed she had fought desperately against her attacker. The stab wounds were clustered, indicating a frenzied personal attack rather than a random act of violence. The medical examiner estimated she died between 8 and 10 p.m. during regular mall hours with hundreds of shoppers nearby. The killer had been methodical despite the brutality. Police found no fingerprints in the car, leading investigators to believe the perpetrator had worn gloves. The cash in Michelle's purse remained untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. She was fully dressed, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. The lack of blood outside the vehicle indicated Michelle had been attacked inside the car, suggesting she either knew her killer or had been surprised before she could escape. What the attacker didn't realize was that in Michelle's desperate struggle, he had left behind crucial evidence. Blood that didn't belong to Michelle was found on her black dress and on the car's gear shift. In 1979, this meant little. DNA profiling wouldn't be invented until 1984 and wouldn't be used in criminal cases until the late 1980s. But that blood, carefully preserved in evidence storage, would become a silent witness, waiting for science to catch up with justice. For now, though, all Cedar Rapids knew was that a young woman had been brutally murdered in a mall parking lot just before Christmas. The killer walked free. And no one knew why Michelle Martinko had been targeted or who would commit such a savage crime. The discovery of Michelle Martinko's body triggered the largest criminal investigation Cedar Rapids had seen in decades. Every available officer was called in, including Detective Harvey Denlinger, who would later recall, "I had never seen anybody stabbed that many times. Something like that was unheard of around here." The investigation faced immediate challenges. This was 1979, before DNA analysis, before mall security cameras, before cell phone tracking. Detectives had to rely on traditional police work, witness interviews, physical evidence, and gut instinct. Within a week, more than 200 people responded to appeals for information. Police administered polygraph tests, questioned everyone who knew Michelle, and followed hundreds of leads. They interviewed a juvenile found carrying a knife and a shopping center employee who admitted to following women around the mall. Both were cleared. The community reacted with fear and outrage. Parents wouldn't let their teenagers visit the mall alone. Women shopped in groups. Rumors spread. Some claimed Michelle had received threatening phone calls before her death, though police found no evidence of this. As investigators dug deeper into Michelle's life, attention focused on her ex-boyfriend, Andy Seidel. The 19-year-old had dated Michelle for 2 years before they broke up. Friends described how Andy struggled with the breakup, constantly asking about Michelle's new relationships and tracking her movements. Investigators learned he had encountered Michelle at the mall that night. At Michelle's funeral, Andy's behavior raised eyebrows. "He was almost in the casket, he was so emotional," recalled Gail Dawson, Michelle's friend. "He said to me, 'I have to know who she loved when she died. Did she love me or did she love Mike?' Though Andy had an alibi provided by his mother, claiming he was home shortly after the mall closed, police remained suspicious. Without physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, however, they couldn't make an arrest. By June 1980, 6 months after the murder, police released a composite sketch based on descriptions from 2 witnesses under hypnosis. It showed a white man in his late teens or early 20s with curly brown hair. A $10,000 reward was offered. Psychics were consulted. Still, the case gradually went cold. For the Martinko family and the Cedar Rapids community, the lack of closure was agonizing. Someone had gotten away with murder. As the 1980s turned into the 1990s, Michelle Martinko's case gradually faded from headlines, but never from Cedar Rapids' collective memory. Each December 19th, local news stations would run anniversary stories, keeping her face and the unsolved mystery in the public consciousness. For Detective Matt Denlinger, who was just 5 years old when Michelle was killed, these annual reminders ensured that it was really hard to miss the severity of it. The investigation that once consumed the police department became a cold case file, gathering dust. In 1995, Albert Martinko, Michelle's father, died without ever seeing justice for his daughter. 3 years later, in 1998, her mother, Janet, also passed away, taking to her grave the anguish of never knowing who murdered their miracle baby. For those who knew Michelle, life continued under the shadow of her unsolved murder. High school classmates moved away, started families, built careers, but carried with them the memory of violence that had shattered their youthful sense of security. Perhaps no one felt the burden more heavily than Andy Seidel, Michelle's ex-boyfriend. Though never charged, the cloud of suspicion followed him for decades. He left Cedar Rapids after high school and joined the Navy, trying to build a life far from the whispers and sideways glances. Andy was a victim himself. Michelle's brother-in-law, John Stonebreaker, would later acknowledge, because many, many fingers were pointing at Andy. In the Cedar Rapids Police Department, the case refused to die. As officers retired, they passed their commitment to younger detectives, creating an unusual inheritance of determination. Harvey Denlinger, one of the original investigators, eventually saw his own son, Matt, join the force and take up the same unsolved murder that had haunted his father. By the mid-2000s, the file had grown thick with interviews, tips, and dead ends, but science was evolving, opening new possibilities for a case that had gone cold but was never forgotten. In 2005, a new cold case investigator, Detective Doug Larison, took a fresh look at Michelle's file. Coincidentally, Larison had gone to high school with Michelle, though they weren't close. "I felt a responsibility toward my classmates, actually, to get this case solved," he would later explain. While reviewing the case, Larison discovered something remarkable. Blood scrapings from the gearshift of the Martinko family's Buick had previously been sent for testing, but no one had followed up on the results. The report showed male DNA present in the blood, DNA that didn't belong to Michelle. It had probably cut himself, and that's how his DNA in his blood got mixed with her blood in the gearshift selector, Larison concluded. Following this lead, he sent Michelle's dress to the lab, finding another spot of blood with the same male DNA profile. The DNA was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database of Arrested Offenders, but no matches appeared. Undeterred, investigators began collecting voluntary DNA samples from more than 100 people connected to the case. Each negative result narrowed the field. Then came the moment Andy Seidel had waited decades for. His voluntary DNA submission cleared him completely. After nearly 30 years living under suspicion, the cloud was finally lifted. Though Michelle's parents had died still believing he might have been their daughter's killer. By 2017, science offered new possibilities. Cedar Rapids police hired Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping, the practice of predicting physical appearance from DNA. Using the blood samples, Parabon created composite images showing a suspect with blonde hair and blue eyes, markedly different from the 1980s sketch based on hypnotized witnesses. The breakthrough came in 2018, inspired by the Golden State Killer case that had used genetic genealogy to identify a suspect. Parabon uploaded the DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogical database where people voluntarily shared their DNA to trace family history. They found a match. Brandy Jennings, an office manager and single mother living in Vancouver, Washington. She wasn't the killer, but her DNA showed she was a second cousin once removed of the man whose blood was found on Michelle's dress. This tenuous connection would become the first thread investigators would pull to unravel a 39-year-old mystery. With Brandy Jennings' DNA connection established, Detective Matt Denlinger began the painstaking process of building a family tree. Working backward through generations, he traced Jennings' lineage to her great-great-grandparents, then methodically worked forward, identifying every possible branch that could contain their suspect. We used genealogical records, birth records, gravestone records, anything we could find on the internet to fill in a bunch of these unknowns, Denlinger explained. As more relatives provided DNA samples, branches of the family tree were systematically eliminated. By October 2018, the investigation had narrowed to a startling conclusion. The killer was likely one of three brothers living in Iowa: Donald, Kenneth, and Jerry Burns. Even more surprising, they weren't in Cedar Rapids, but in Manchester, a small town just 45 minutes away. The Burns brothers had no obvious connection to Michelle Martinko. They'd never been interviewed or considered in the original investigation. Nothing in their backgrounds suggested a capacity for such violence. Police needed to collect their DNA without alerting them. A clandestine surveillance operation began. For the first brother, investigators collected a discarded straw after watching him eat lunch. For the second, they retrieved a toothbrush from his garbage. And for Jerry Burns, a team followed him to a Pizza Ranch restaurant in Manchester. He drank at least 2 sodas out of a glass with a straw, Denlinger recalled. When Burns left, officers retrieved the straw from the trash. The lab results eliminated 2 brothers, but delivered a stunning conclusion about the third. Jerry Burns' DNA was an exact match to the blood found on Michelle's dress 40 years earlier. The match was definitive. The probability of the DNA belonging to anyone else was less than 1 in 100 billion. But nothing about Jerry Burns fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer. At 65, he was a respected businessman who owned a powder coating company. He had no criminal record, had been married with children, and was well regarded in Manchester. How could this ordinary man harbor such a dark secret for nearly 4 decades? Detective Matt Denlinger chose December 19, 2018, to confront Jerry Burns. Exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle Martinko's murder. With a hidden camera concealed in a coffee mug, Denlinger entered Burns's powder coating business in Manchester. "Hey, how are you today? Jerry, my name's Matt with the Cedar Rapids Police Department," Denlinger began casually. Then he cut to the heart of the matter. "The reality is, we have your DNA at the crime scene, and so we know you were there that night. This happened." Burns' reaction was perplexing. He showed virtually no emotion, no shock, anger, or panic, just a flat affect that investigators found unsettling. When asked directly how his DNA could have been found at the crime scene, Burns replied simply, "I don't know." He acknowledged having visited Westdale Mall with his family in the past, but couldn't remember specific dates. When pressed about Michelle's murder, Burns repeatedly deflected, saying only, "Test the DNA," when asked if he had killed someone that night in 1979. After his arrest, Burns made an even more curious statement during the ride to the police station. When Denlinger asked if it was possible he'd committed the crime but didn't remember it, Burns replied, I'm sure something like that would be possible. To block out. You block things out of your memories. Most disturbing was Burns' unprompted mention of Jody Huisentruit, a blonde news anchor who disappeared in 1995 from a parking lot in Mason City, Iowa, 2 hours from Burns' home. Her body was never found. Though investigators have not publicly connected Burns to Huisentrut's case, the random reference raised alarming questions. News of Burns' arrest stunned both communities. In Cedar Rapids, residents who had lived with the unsolved case for decades experienced a complex mix of relief and shock. In Manchester, neighbors and friends of Jerry Burns simply couldn't reconcile the quiet businessman they knew with the monster described in police reports. His family was devastated, with his daughter Jennifer insisting, "We did not believe it. This cannot be our dad." In February 2020, 40 years after Michelle Martinko's murder, Jerry Burns entered a Scott County courtroom to stand trial. Due to intense publicity in Cedar Rapids, the proceedings had been moved to Davenport, an hour away. The courtroom was packed, filled with Michelle's aging friends, curious locals, and a family divided between victim and accused. Prosecutor Nick Maybanks faced a daunting challenge: build a compelling case around DNA evidence from a crime scene 4 decades old. "We've got the science. We got the guy," Maybanks told jurors. "There's a 1 in 100 billion chance that it could be somebody else's. There's only 8 billion people or so in the world." The prosecution called retired investigators, the doctor who performed Michelle's autopsy, and forensic experts who confirmed that Burns' DNA matched blood found on both Michelle's dress and the car's gearshift. They played video of Burns' police interview, highlighting his inability to explain how his DNA ended up at the crime scene. Burns' defense attorney, Leon Speece, argued that DNA transfer could have occurred innocently. Every time you come into contact with something, you're shedding DNA. You're leaving a biological trail of yourself, Spies told the jury. He suggested that Burns, who had once worked at a car dealership that sold Buicks, might have inadvertently left DNA in the car through his job, though he couldn't explain how it also appeared on Michelle's dress. The trial took an unexpected turn when Michael Allison, a jail inmate who had befriended Burns, testified about disturbing comments Burns had made. According to Allison, when asked directly if he had committed the crime, Burns replied, "I can't talk about this." Most chilling was Burns's alleged statement during a card game. If Allison kept beating him at pinochle, he was going to have to take me to the mall. After nearly 2 weeks of testimony, the jury needed just 3 hours to reach their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was eerily silent as the decision was read. Janelle Stonebreaker, Michelle's sister and only surviving immediate family member, later described the moment, "We almost couldn't breathe. It was just amazing. It was fabulous." On August 7, 2020, Jerry Burns was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He maintained his innocence throughout, filing an appeal that would ultimately be denied by the Iowa Supreme Court in 2023. Even after his conviction and failed appeals, Jerry Burns maintains his innocence. His family stands by him, with his daughter Jennifer insisting, "I don't think there's any way that my dad could have done this." Yet the DNA evidence speaks with scientific certainty of his guilt. The most haunting questions may never be answered. Why Michelle? Why that night? Did Burns target her specifically? Or was she tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time? No connection between victim and killer has ever been established. In a poignant twist, Michelle's desperate fight for her life ultimately brought her justice. She fought so hard that she caused the murderer to cut himself he left his DNA, her sister Janelle observed. Michelle helped solve her own murder. For Detective Matt Denlinger and his father Harvey, the case represents a generational pursuit of justice. "I'm proud as heck of him," Harvey said of his son, who could barely hold back tears when reflecting on completing the case his father began. Cedar Rapids still remembers Michelle Martinko, not just for her tragic death, but for how she lived. Her case has become a landmark in forensic science. Proof that time may pass, but DNA doesn't forget, and justice, though delayed, is not denied. As Cedar Rapids passes another winter, Michelle Martinko is remembered not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman who loved music, had dreams of designing beautiful spaces, and left an indelible mark on all who knew her. Her case stands alongside others like the Golden State Killer as testament to the power of genetic genealogy to speak for victims long silenced. For dozens of cold cases across America, DNA evidence waits patiently in evidence lockers. Silent witnesses that may yet identify killers who believe they've escaped justice. Michelle's story reminds us that for the murdered, time never truly runs out. April 16, 1996, a crisp spring morning in Manchester, England. The doors of the Gorton police station swing open as a middle-aged man walks in with disturbing composure. His hands are clean, his demeanor unnervedly calm, but his soul is stained with unimaginable brutality. "I've killed her. I know I have," he confesses matter-of-factly to the desk sergeant, as though reporting a minor traffic incident. "She's in the bath." "I think I've killed her." Within minutes, officers arrive at the modest, semi-detached house on Furnival Road. What they discover inside stops even the most hardened detectives in their tracks. Blood spatters mark the walls of every room, and upstairs, lying motionless, they find the body of 17-year-old Kellyanne Bates. What these officers witnessed that day would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Evidence of weeks of systematic torture so extreme that the pathologist would later describe her injuries as the worst he had seen in over 600 murder cases. Before we continue again, I must warn you. What follows contains descriptions of extreme violence and torture that many will find deeply disturbing. If accounts of severe abuse and torture are triggering for you, now would be the time to stop watching. For those who choose to continue, I ask that you remember the human being at the center of this tragedy. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. The mid-1990s in Manchester, England, was a time of transition. Once the powerhouse of Britain's Industrial Revolution, the city was slowly reinventing itself after decades of economic decline. Post-industrial Manchester still bore the scars of unemployment and urban decay, particularly in its working-class districts. Hattersley, where Kellyanne Bates grew up, was a housing estate built in the 1960s to rehouse families from Manchester's inner-city slums. By the 90s, it had developed into a close-knit community where neighbors looked out for one another, where family roots ran deep, and where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. 8 miles away in Gorton, where James Patterson Smith lived, the landscape was similar. Rows of modest terraced houses and semi-detached homes where residents often lived for decades. Smith's house on Furnival Road was unremarkable, a 2-bedroom semi in a quiet cul-de-sac that never drew attention. These were communities where people recognized faces, where strangers stood out, where a teenager's absence would typically raise questions. Yet somehow, behind an ordinary front door, Kellyanne Bates endured weeks of unimaginable torture without intervention. This is perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case, how such extreme violence remained hidden in plain sight, in streets where children played, where people passed by daily, completely unaware of the horror unfolding just feet away from them. How could something so monstrous happen in a place where, supposedly, everyone knew everyone? On a spring day in 1978, May 18th to be exact, Kellyanne Bates was born to Margaret and Tommy Bates in Hattersley, Greater Manchester. Growing up in this working-class community, Kellyanne quickly revealed herself to be a bright, energetic child with a natural warmth that drew others to her. Home videos and photographs from her childhood show a smiling girl with expressive eyes and an infectious laugh. Friends from her early years would later describe her as kind-hearted and loyal, someone who stood up for others and rarely complained about her own troubles. At school, Kellyanne flourished both academically and athletically. She particularly excelled in track events, her natural speed and determination making her a standout performer. Teachers noted her enthusiasm for learning and her thoughtful participation in classroom discussions. Kelly was the kind of student who made teaching worthwhile, one former teacher recalled. She was curious about the world and genuinely cared about others. You could see that in how she interacted with everyone around her. By her mid-teens, Kellyanne had developed a clear vision for her future. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, inspired perhaps by those who had recognized her potential. In 1994, she enrolled in college in Hyde to improve her GCSE results, determined to secure a place in a teacher training program. To support herself through her studies, she took a part-time job at K2 Graphics in Audenshaw, where colleagues remembered her as hardworking and reliable. Like many teenagers in the mid-90s, Kellyanne enjoyed music, taking particular pleasure in the emerging Britpop scene, and spent weekends with friends at local shops and cafes. She kept a diary, wrote poetry, and maintained a close relationship with her mother, Margaret, who would later describe their bond as one filled with laughter and mutual respect. She was just finding herself, just like any other teenager, Margaret would later tell reporters, her voice breaking with emotion. She had all these plans, all these dreams about becoming a teacher, about traveling, about her whole life ahead of her. None of those who knew Kellyanne could have imagined that her bright future would be extinguished so brutally, or that the man who would destroy it was already watching from the shadows, waiting for his opportunity. James Patterson Smith was born around 1948 in Manchester. By the time he met Kelly, he was 48 years old, a man who had spent decades perfecting his dual nature. To the outside world, Smith presented a carefully crafted image of respectability. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as well-groomed and house-proud. His modest, semi-detached home on Furnival Road was immaculately maintained, reflecting a man who appeared to value order and cleanliness. Unlike many perpetrators of extreme violence, Smith didn't drink alcohol or use drugs. He was a teetotaler and non-smoker who maintained a neat appearance and quiet demeanor. This facade of respectability helped him blend seamlessly into the community. People who knew him casually might describe him as unremarkable, perhaps even a model citizen. But behind closed doors existed an entirely different man, a man consumed by pathological jealousy and an insatiable need for control. Smith's violent tendencies first came to public light through his marriage, which ended in 1980 after 10 years due to his escalating abuse. His ex-wife would later testify to his possessive nature and hair-trigger temper, describing how his initially charming personality gradually gave way to something far more sinister. Following his divorce, Smith's pattern of targeting vulnerable women continued. From 1980 to 1982, he began a relationship with 20-year-old Tina Watson. According to her later testimony, Smith systematically broke down her self-esteem and isolated her from friends and family. Watson described being used as a punch bag, enduring regular beatings that intensified when she became pregnant with his child. At first it was now and again, just a little tap, Watson recalled. But in the end it was every day. He would smack me in the face or hit me over the head with an ashtray. He would kick me in the legs or between the legs. Most chillingly, during one incident, Smith attempted to drown Watson while she was bathing, a horrifying precursor to what would later happen to Kelly. After Watson managed to escape the relationship, Smith quickly found another vulnerable target. In 1982, he began a relationship with 15-year-old Wendy Mottershead. The pattern repeated: isolation, control, and escalating violence. Mottershead later revealed that Smith had once held her head underwater in the kitchen sink, attempting to drown her. "It frightened me," Mottershead later testified. "But you get to the point where you're too frightened to do anything or say anything. You just took it." These weren't simply angry outbursts, but deliberate acts of dominance, systematic attempts to establish absolute control through terror. Psychiatric experts would later suggest Smith suffered from a severe paranoid disorder with morbid jealousy, living in what was described as a distorted reality. What makes Smith's case particularly disturbing is how effectively he compartmentalized his behavior. Neighbors never reported disturbances. There were no drunken incidents or public outbursts. The monster remained perfectly contained behind the walls of his ordinary home, emerging only when he had his victims completely isolated and under his control. This was the man who had set his sights on 14-year-old Kellyanne Bates in 1993, not as a sudden predatory impulse, but as the next victim in a calculated pattern that had been developing for decades. In 1993, Kellyanne Bates was just 14 years old, a schoolgirl with her life ahead of her. James Patterson Smith was 45, a middle-aged man with a hidden history of violence. Their paths crossed in the most mundane of circumstances when Kelly was babysitting for one of Smith's friends. After she finished her babysitting duties that evening, Smith offered to walk her home to keep her safe. This seemingly protective gesture was the first step in a calculated grooming process. Smith positioned himself as a guardian figure, a mature man who could offer protection and guidance to a young girl navigating adolescence. For Kelly, a teenager experiencing the natural desire for independence, Smith's attention likely felt flattering, a validation of her maturity. Over the coming months, Smith cultivated their connection carefully. He listened to Kelly's teenage problems, offered advice, and positioned himself as the one person who truly understood her. This is the insidious nature of grooming. It masquerades as care, while systematically isolating the victim from their natural support systems. Kelly kept the relationship secret from her parents for nearly 2 years, understanding intuitively that they would disapprove of the age gap. When she spoke of him at all, she referred to him as Dave rather than Jim, and claimed he was 32, still significantly older, but not the 45-year-old predator he actually was. It wasn't until Kelly was 16 that Margaret Bates would finally meet the man who had been secretly seeing her daughter. One day, Margaret returned home to find Kelly waiting in the kitchen. Moments later, she heard footsteps on the stairs as Smith descended into the room. Margaret would later describe that moment with chilling clarity. As I walked in, he swaggered down the stairs, and it made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. He was much older than I expected and looked a bit like John Denver, but he was smarmy. He said, "Nice to meet you at last," and all I could think of was how I wanted to get rid of him. What happened next would haunt Margaret Bates for the rest of her life. As Smith stood in her kitchen, Margaret experienced an overwhelming urge to act. "I vividly recall seeing our bread knife in the kitchen and wanting to pick it up and stab him in the back," she later revealed. "It was a bizarre thought. I would never normally think of anything so violent, and now I wonder whether it was some sort of sixth sense." That premonition, that visceral, instinctive warning would prove tragically prophetic. Following their initial meeting, Margaret Bates tried repeatedly to dissuade her daughter from continuing the relationship with Smith. "I tried everything I could to get Kellyanne away from him," she would later say. But by then, Smith's influence had taken root. Kelly began pulling away from her family and friends, the classic first step in an abuser's playbook. As Smith's control deepened, Kelly's once vibrant personality began to dim. Friends who had known her as outgoing and confident noticed her becoming increasingly withdrawn. She started making excuses to avoid social gatherings and gradually disappeared from the lives of those who cared about her. In November 1995, shortly after turning 17, Kelly made the fateful decision to move in with Smith at his home on Furnival Road in Gorton. Her parents, though deeply concerned, had limited options to intervene. Under UK law, Kelly was over 16, legally able to make her own decisions about where and with whom she lived. The signs of abuse emerged quickly. During her increasingly rare visits home, Kelly's parents noticed bruises on her arms and body. When questioned, she offered the textbook excuses that domestic abuse victims often provide. She'd walked into a door, she'd fallen downstairs, she was just clumsy. On one occasion, she arrived with a black eye, claiming she had been attacked by a gang of girls after school. Tommy and Margaret Bates watched helplessly as their daughter's independence was systematically stripped away. In December 1995, just weeks after moving in with Smith, Kelly quit her job at the graphics firm. cutting off not only her financial independence, but also her daily contact with people outside Smith's control. As Christmas approached, Kelly's absence from family celebrations marked another red flag. The holiday came and went without her appearance, unprecedented in a family that had always been close. Phone calls became increasingly sporadic, and when they did occur, Margaret noted something different in her daughter's voice. Hesitations, strange pauses, as though someone was monitoring what she said. In March 1996, the family received 2 cards, one for Tommy's birthday and another for their wedding anniversary. Neither contained Kelly's handwriting. Both had been signed by Smith on her behalf. This alarming development prompted Margaret to suggest visiting Smith's house, but Tommy was hesitant, hoping their daughter would reach out when ready. "I tried to persuade my husband to go round," Margaret later recalled. "I was concerned he had written the cards himself to wind me up, or he had her tied up, or he'd hurt her in some way that she could not write the cards herself. When Kelly's brother attempted to visit her at Smith's house, he was told she wasn't home. A concerned neighbor who inquired after her was briefly shown Kelly at an upstairs window, a disturbing glimpse that would later be understood as Smith demonstrating his control." The last confirmed sighting of Kelly alive by someone outside the house was in November 1995, shortly after she moved in with Smith. For the next 5 months, her existence would be hidden behind the walls of Smith's house, her suffering invisible to the outside world. Despite the Bates family's growing alarm, they faced the painful limitations of the law. Without concrete evidence of abuse, and with Kelly being a legal adult, authorities had limited grounds to intervene, a tragic gap in protection that would have fatal consequences. What happened to Kelly Ann Bates in the final month of her life represents one of the most disturbing cases of sustained torture ever documented in British criminal history. While the full details are almost too horrific to comprehend, understanding the systematic nature of her suffering is crucial to grasping both the depravity of Smith's actions and the complete vulnerability of Kelly's position. By March 1996, Kelly had essentially disappeared from the outside world. No phone calls, no sightings, no communication with family or friends. Court evidence would later reveal that during this period, Kelly was no longer a girlfriend or even a domestic abuse victim. She had become a prisoner in Smith's house. For approximately 4 weeks, Smith subjected Kelly to a calculated regime of torture that defies understanding. The evidence indicated he frequently bound her, sometimes tying her by her hair to radiators or furniture. At other times, he secured a ligature around her neck, tethering her like an animal, restricting her movement to further assert his complete dominance. The medical examiner's report revealed that during this period, Kelly was systematically starved. She lost approximately 20 kilograms, 44 pounds, in weight, and evidence suggested she had been deprived of water for several days before her death. This deliberate starvation weakened her physically, making resistance increasingly impossible as the torture escalated. What separated Smith's actions from many other cases of extreme violence was the methodical, prolonged nature of the abuse. This wasn't a single explosive outburst of rage, but a sustained campaign of torture that increased in severity over time. The medical evidence revealed injuries in various stages of healing, confirming the prosecution's assertion that Smith was deliberately and systematically torturing Kelly over an extended period. Among the most disturbing aspects of the case was the evidence that Smith had gouged out Kelly's eyes, an act that forensic experts determined had occurred between 5 days and 3 weeks before her death. This meant that for the final period of her life, Kelly endured her ongoing torture while completely blind, amplifying her terror and helplessness. Beyond the physical violence, Smith subjected Kelly to profound psychological torture, the kind that breaks not just the body, but the spirit. The total isolation, the unpredictability of his attacks, and the complete power imbalance created a psychological prison as effective as any physical restraints. Prosecutor Peter Openshaw would later tell the court, "It was as if he deliberately disfigured her, causing her the utmost pain, distress, and degradation." The injuries were not the result of one sudden eruption of violence. They must have been caused over a long period and were so extensive and so terrible that the defendant must have deliberately and systematically tortured the girl. The methodical cruelty suggests Smith derives satisfaction not just from inflicting pain, but from the complete control he exercised over another human being. Psychiatric experts would later suggest his actions reflected a profound pathology, a need to utterly dominate and destroy that went beyond even typical cases of domestic violence. Throughout this final month, Kelly remained hidden behind the walls of an ordinary house on an ordinary street. The extraordinary horror of her situation, invisible to neighbors who passed by daily, unaware of the young woman's suffering just feet away from them. On April 16, 1996, at approximately 9 a.m., James Patterson Smith walked into Gorton Police Station. His demeanor was unnervingly calm as he approached the front desk and made a startling announcement. "I've killed her. I know I've killed her." Officers on duty were struck by his matter-of-fact tone as he explained that his girlfriend had accidentally drowned during an argument while she was in the bath. According to Smith, Kelly had swallowed bathwater, and despite his attempts at resuscitation, she had died. He added the bizarre claim that she often pretended to be unconscious, suggesting he initially thought she was faking. "I know I'm going away," Smith told the officers. "I know there is no point. I'm going to get found out anyway." Police officers were immediately dispatched to Smith's address on Furnival Road. What they discovered upon entering the house would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Blood was found throughout the property, not just isolated spots, but smears and splatters across walls, floors, and ceilings in every room. The officers followed the grim trail to an upstairs bedroom where they found Kelly's body. The initial observations at the scene made it immediately clear that this was no accidental drowning. The visible injuries on Kelly's body told a story of prolonged, extreme violence that contradicted Smith's account entirely. Detective Sergeant Joseph Monahan, who headed the murder inquiry, would later state, "I have been in the police force for 15 years and have never seen a case as horrific as this." His sentiment was echoed by every officer involved in the investigation. Veterans who thought they had seen the worst humanity could offer found themselves profoundly shaken by what had been done to Kelly Ann Bates. The forensic investigation that followed was painstaking and disturbing. Home Office pathologist Dr. William Lawler performed a post-mortem examination, methodically documenting over 150 separate injuries across Kelly's body. As each injury was catalogued and photographed, the horrifying extent of her suffering became increasingly clear. Standing in the witness box during Smith's trial, Dr. Lawler, a man who had examined approximately 600 murder victims throughout his career, made a statement that underscored the exceptional brutality of the case. "I have never come across injuries so extensive." The official cause of death was drowning, but the pathology report revealed that immediately before being submerged, Kelly had been beaten about the head with a shower head, a final act of violence before the drowning that ended her life. James Patterson Smith's trial began at Manchester Crown Court in November 1997. From the outset, his defense strategy revealed the disturbing workings of his mind. Despite the overwhelming physical evidence, Smith maintained his innocence, offering explanations that range from implausible to utterly delusional. "She would put me through hell, winding me up," Smith told the court, attempting to position himself as the victim. He claimed Kelly had taunted him about his dead mother and suggested that many of her injuries were self-inflicted. "She has a bad habit of hurting herself to make it look worse on me," he stated with chilling detachment. When pressed by the prosecution to explain the gouging of Kelly's eyes, Smith offered perhaps his most disturbing response. He claimed she had challenged him to do it, daring him to harm her. Dr. Julian Mezzi, a consultant psychiatrist, testified that Smith suffered from a severe paranoid disorder with morbid jealousy and lived in what she described as a distorted reality, a clinical assessment that, while explaining his psychology, did nothing to diminish his culpability. The jury was unmoved by Smith's defense. After hearing the overwhelming evidence and viewing the harrowing photographs documenting Kelly's injuries, they took just 1 hour to reach their verdict: guilty of murder. On November 19, 1997, Smith was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 20 years before being considered for parole. Judge Mr. Justice Sachs delivered a powerful statement during sentencing. "This has been a terrible case, a catalogue of depravity by one human being upon another. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, so far as it is in my power, that you will abuse no more." In an unprecedented move, the court offered professional counseling to all members of the jury to help them process the psychological trauma of the evidence they had been required to consider. All jurors accepted this support. The murder of Kellyanne Bates left wounds that would never fully heal for those who loved her. For Margaret Bates, her daughter's death brought not only overwhelming grief, but a burden of regret that would haunt her for decades. "I had been waiting for the knock on the door," Margaret said, referring to the police officers who came to inform her of Kelly's death. "But nobody believed me." That maternal intuition, the sixth sense that had prompted her urge to grab a knife when she first met Smith, became both a source of torment and a driving force in her life moving forward. Following Kelly's murder, Margaret channeled her grief into advocacy, working with domestic violence organizations to help educate young people about the warning signs of controlling relationships. She has spoken openly about her experience, hoping that by sharing Kelly's story, other parents might recognize dangerous patterns before it's too late. The case had a profound impact on how authorities in Greater Manchester approach domestic violence. The recognition that abuse can escalate to extreme levels even when victims are not regularly visiting hospital emergency rooms or calling police led to enhanced training for officers in identifying high-risk situations and intervening earlier. Perhaps most significantly, Kelly's case highlighted how effectively abusers can isolate their victims, creating situations where even in densely populated areas, someone can essentially disappear while technically still living in the community. This understanding has informed modern approaches to welfare checks and missing persons investigations, particularly involving young adults who may legally choose their living situations but might be under coercive control. The warning signs that appeared throughout Kelly's relationship with Smith, the age gap, the isolation, the unexplained injuries, the withdrawal from work and social circles, are now widely taught as red flags in educational programs about domestic abuse. These patterns of control and manipulation that once might have been dismissed as merely concerning are now recognized as potentially lethal risk factors. As we reflect on Kelly's life, it's important to remember that she was not defined by her death. She was a young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher, with a laugh that lit up rooms, with friends who cherished her, and with a family who loved her deeply. Her life mattered, not just as a cautionary tale, but for all the joy and potential it contained. For anyone experiencing domestic abuse, please remember that help is available. In the UK, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline is available 24/7 at 808-2247. In the US, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Kellyanne Bates deserved a future that was stolen from her. Her memory now serves as a powerful reminder that what happens behind closed doors can escalate to unimaginable extremes, and that recognizing the warning signs may save lives. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.